Hi, Mia.
Hi, GMP. Wonderful to be speaking with you.
Great
Covering
to talk.
both sides of the world.
I know, isn't this great? So what's going on there in Australia?
Well, lots of things. But I guess a key area of my interest at the moment, of course, being a mum, is parenting. I'm watching some really awesome children and some young ones, and I see their enthusiasm and smiles and just everything that's wonderful about them. And I'd really like to know how better to facilitate them coming up in the world as the beautiful people they are. And I've also got friends who ask questions like, what do you do with discipline? How do how are you going to do that when your son does this, etc. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to ask you, your views on that.
Well, remember, they're just views. They're not in cement, and people can agree or disagree. I think when we follow our heart, we're better at what we're doing. And today being a beautiful day here in Arizona, I just want to send sunshine your guys' way. Now, what's the season there now? You guys are in summer, right?
We're in summer. We've just passed the summer solstice, so the days are getting shorter, but they're still long and warm.
That's one of the things that we want to make sure that our children know is how the time zones and how there's all these particular life times going on by how we move through time zones, It's because like here we're in the middle of winter, in this particular hemisphere, and people are living under total different environmental conditions. And so all that's going on within the same planet. And sometimes we have to talk to our children and get them involved in that so that they actually realize their role in that, you know what I mean? So that everybody stays sensitive to what's happening. And once we involve them in the much bigger picture, then we don't have so much to discipline. So the whole, thing about discipline is to be preventative and not need it. So, getting them in the environment of life, making sure that they're within the cyclic influences that are all around us, be the heavens, like the moon, the sun. And I know you do that with your children. You take note of the fact that sunrise is special. And the energy that emanates at sunrise throughout the whole planet is very, very powerful. Most people refer to them as vortexes. And then the sunset gives us a time to review and talk about what the day's goals were and the successes of them. And children begin to work with that and realize that this is the ongoingness. And yet it's a much bigger picture of all the other things that they have to contend with in a day's time. So just involving children in what's real and not just trying to control them, not just trying to continue to have a very disciplined environment, that they learn to be expressive, that they learn to cooperate. And in you showing patience, and when you start matching their anger or their frustrations and that's when disciplines are needed. The personal self-discipline of parents is to learn to not take themselves so serious and to not feel so guilty about the fact that they don't know all the answers, that they can just simply, hey, take it, let's let it flow, let's play with them. I can remember, because my two youngest children were only 18 months apart. And I can remember days that the demand and the high energy with everything else that I was doing, that there would be times that they would get whiny, and I would realize they're whining about something emotionally attached to them. And so I didn't have any way to deal with what all that was, you know what I mean? So sometimes I'd just sit down on the floor with them and pull them both on my lap, and I'd just cry with them. And as soon as I'd start crying with them, they'd stop crying and look at me real inquisitive and say, you okay, Mommy? And it's like, no, because you're not okay, and I don't have anything to fix it. So I just feel you're crying. I'm crying with you. And they would start fixing me, They would start trying to make me feel better. And in it all, they started to feel better. I'm not suggesting that to every parent. I'm just telling you that was my solution for those days when 10 million things were firing at one time. And the children felt that. And their stress become my stress. And I didn't need to pretend anything else. I just sat down with them and said, yeah, it's just not the best of time right now. We're not doing so good. And so we cried. And they just looked at me, it's like, no, we don't want mommy to cry. So then they stopped crying, and then they started talking to me about what it was that they wanted to have done. And I had to just take those moments for them and only them. And it worked. It's one fix is a big choice.
Having any fix, I know, can really help, especially in those times.
I know. Cade was definitely a run for the goals for you. I mean, with all of us, anytime he was around, the energy level that some children like him are, and I know they get labeled in the system as hypertensive and all this other stuff. No, there's just a real mission in their life for the energy level that they hold. So you and Mayo were a good balance for all of his energy, but you realize at times you just didn't know where to go with it. And every parent, has to be honest with themselves and say they don't know how to have all those answers at any one time. We just don't.
And in relation to that as well, does it really matter how parents follow the rules as to how their children grow up? Like, how much does that early environment carry with them?
Okay. Why don't you say that to me differently?
I guess it's like there are perceived rules that people think they have to follow when they're a parent, like children should go to bed on time, they should eat well, they should rest well, those sorts of things. How much does that influence? Like they say, if you don't get a child in a pattern and organized early, then they're skills that they won't have later in life. So does that really matter? Yeah,
I hear you. Rules are guilt trips. See, I wanted you to reword that because I want you to hear where I'm going to go with that. Rules are nothing but guilt trips. Okay? And we have rules that have been given to us or passed on to us, and most likely have been lived by you. Your own childhood is the emanation of that. And they're guilt trips. Okay, here's what we have to remember as parents. These children are individual beings. They're here on their own mission and purpose. Okay, and when they're very little and in our arms and all we do is poke food in their mouth and wipe their little bottoms, it's heaven because we have such control. Okay, and if they cry, we run and pick them up, and then we start realizing at that point some of the reality that says, okay, what's wrong with this child and how am I going to fix it, And then we start going through what do we think we can do, what have we been told to do, and still all in all, this little non-talking entity is looking at us and screaming, and we wonder, oh my God, what does he have cramps? Does it have this? So that uncertainty begins to be a pattern in parenting. And then we begin to desperately try to hold to something stable, and that's our rules. But every one of them is a stick that we beat ourselves with because they don't work. The rule of the moment is what I want to pass on to parents. The rule of the moment, that as it comes, you have to have a set of values and policies. See, and I say policies instead of rules because we can adjust the policies to the condition, the time, the situation, And so it's always applicable. It can be, for this time can be different. When we say rules, they have a particular criteria. And it has to be this way. And if it's not this way, then the stress starts and the conditions come on. And it's crazy. So, life in itself moves, right? We know it's always action, right? And one situation with your child never is the same situation again. Well, neither is it with us. Neither is it with us. Whatever that child has learned or was involved with when that moment was going on, you were too. So as you guys move out of that moment together, each of you are different. So in the parenting, we are growing into the stewardship of that child. We are growing in with that child. And that child is teaching us as much about humanity as we will probably ever want to know. So rules don't work. They're simply guilt trips. Now policies, systems, practices. See, they all sound, what? Adaptable, don't they? So
yes.
okay, I tried that and that didn't work. You don't have to feel guilty about it. You put your best forward and it didn't happen to go that way. But now you know, well, if I had put a little of this in it, it probably could have come out better, And at that point, we're honest to ourselves in saying that we're reaching for solutions. And a good strategist is aware that the best laid plan will have to have adjustments along the action line of it. So goes it with parents. And, I look at mothers, and when they come to me for help and they look haggard and they got bags under their eyes, and it doesn't take but 2 or 3 words from me that they burst out crying. And that isn't anything but feeling totally helpless, totally not in control, totally stressed to the point of not really being able to give love to this child, which is its only need, okay? Friendship and love, kindness, can't happen when you feel you're doing nothing right and that nothing's working. But if, one of the things I would want parents to say to their children is always to let them know we're in the game together, and that no matter how little they are, even as little infants, newborn infants, that something's happening, and then you want to say, well, let's see what we can do with that. Let's see what we can help this with. How do we need to assist the situation? And then the child begins to hear that, and the intelligence that we all are, okay, begins to respond to the togetherness that we're involved in here. And it works. It definitely works.
Yes, I definitely hear what you're saying there, and that makes a lot of sense. And reflecting on situations, I can see that is what has the outcomes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And along those lines, with your birth children, do they follow your faith and your cultural practices as well?
Oh, heavenly, no. No. And that was a bigger, loop, jumping through a loop for me, is that I knew, according to my own cultural influence, that I had to always honor their choices, that I didn't own these children, that these are children of Great Spirit, and that in doing that, I'm the steward. So I'm not there to imprint my way on them. I'm there to simply watch them and to cultivate their stuff, their mission in life, their skills, the unfoldment of this beautiful being that's been entrusted to me. So this is what I did with them. So each one of my children explored different religions and different faiths as they were growing up. Sometimes that was influenced by their friendships, and other times it was just something that they had read or seen in the many things that I kept exposing them to, so that I allowed their spirit to generate to where they want to be in life and how they want to carry that. My oldest son is still very much involved in what I would consider native culture, and my middle son is pretty much into Christianity, and my daughter stands pretty much into what I would call New Age perspective of beliefs. She believes in energy. She believes purely in the fact that everything is inclusive and one. So she works from an energy field. You know what I'm saying? So I would say that each of them have a bit and a piece that might have resonated to them, but to say that they're an exact replica of all the things I do, no. And as children, most of it, they resented the rituals, the ceremonies. There were some they had fun with, some they didn't want any part of. They sat in respect most of the time to what I did. And I always allowed them, do you want to participate or not? So there was never any time that they had to participate. They had to come with me. So one of the have-tos in my environment with them as children was to be present with them. So I would tell them, okay, Mom's got to go do this and everything, so we're going to go, and why don't you gather some things that you may want to play with, or some things of your own interest in that. And in all my teaching time, wherever I went in the world to teach, when they were very small, I took them with me. As they grew, they were, it was always an open invitation if they wanted to come. And my children, most of the time, was homeschooled. The system, though my older son went through the system of education and found out that it wasn't what he wanted it to be. So, there was just these different things. But I think that they celebrate the likeness that we are in the fact that, they have the success teachings, I would say, but they have chose different ways to express themselves.
Mm-hmm. Again, that's really strong and powerful. While it sounds like a simple concept, to actually watch that in practice is another thing, and to do it in practice. And from hearing from what you're saying, obviously a lot of that is the parent's own need to either live themselves through the child or know that there is only one way. So it feels that having a child and being able to do as you've just described means that there's a lot of personal growth as well, in terms of being okay with where you're at, that you don't need to impose it on another.
Right. And that we're all individual before God and need to make our choices.
Yes, and I can see that what we learn with applying that with our children, we could apply with everybody, and that would certainly help interactions in general.
I agree.
Yeah.
All right.
Building from that one, as a parent and the teaching of what you do with parents, if you were to have one thing that you said is the most powerful thing you'd want them to know and be sure of, what would that be?
That they're always loved.
Yeah.
That they're always loved, and that there's an ever-presence abiding with us that is nothing but love, and allows us life at whatever level we want to play, and to make, the choices. I taught my children early about consequences, that there's an effect in everything that they do. And I taught them that was how important they were, that their very presence had meaning and purpose, and that they had to always be aware that was the importance of them as life. And so consequences was always spoke about, and not in a derogatory or a suppressive way, but to say to them, okay, everything we think, everything we do, and every action that we anticipate has an effect. Now, are we clear of what the effects are that you're going for? Are we clear of what the very outcome will be to what we're doing? And giving them the heads up, look ahead and see what the consequences are going to be. And realizing that even if the consequences say that they're going to be a little bit more intense than what we maybe want, we will learn from it. And to realize that failure is not fatal, okay, and that we are allowed to make mistakes and retakes, okay, and that we simply can fail forward. Failure, if you're not, and I've taught my children very much this, if you're not having failure, you're not progressing. Failure simply means that you're doing the best you know and the highest skill that you have in any given situation. And it's going to show you what you need. That's all failure is good for. It's to show you what you need. And in school systems, children are made to feel guilty and less than due to failing or not grasping what it is they have to have here. You know what I mean? And so then they're given a grade that classifies them less than or better than and all that. And where does that go? Look at the world. That's where it goes. We need to help correct that. So I always allowed my children to know, okay, and when they would come not happy with an outcome, I would say, okay, but did we clearly think through the consequences, the effects? And what would we change now if that's what we have to do? Okay, spanking and beating and trying to punish with disciplines of putting children in corners or putting them in closets or whatever that stuff is. Okay, you're not looking at the fact that you're dealing with intelligence. And it's all energy. And when we start realizing that, it's that field of energy and intelligence that we can always find the solutions and put things in the direction that we really want it to be. And we get, in my culture, we are rewarded for our failures. It meant that we went and we took the risk, and therefore that took courage. So we were given acknowledgement of courage. And my children were raised with that. Everybody that I teach that come for personal mentoring and counseling to learn Nuwati, the ways of medicine, and the ways of our culture. That's the base of its reality. And I think now that we have to close, so I just want to make sure that people know that we'll be going on. You're going to continue with the interview in segments. Is that right?
That's correct.
All
yes.
right. Well, thank you very much for this time, Mia. And I think you've kind of won out with practicing these yourself with your two beautiful beings.
Well, it's wonderful advice, and I can see how it can help so many as well. So I greatly appreciate the time today.
Thank you.